The wind screamed across the frozen mountains like a wounded beast, and Claire Weston pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders as she listened to the storm rage outside her cabin walls. She had survived many winters on this alien world, but tonight felt different somehow, as if the universe itself was holding its breath for something terrible or something wonderful to happen. 3 years had passed since her ship crashed on this distant planet. 3 long years since she watched the burning wreckage of the colonial vessel scatter across the frozen tundra. She was the only survivor, a military medic with nothing but her training and her stubborn refusal to die. The draconian empire that ruled this world had found her wandering through the snow and permitted her to live. Though they made it very clear that humans were considered lesser beings here, useful only for simple labor and unworthy of respect, Claire had built her life in this small cabin at the edge of the Whitefall Mountains, far from the dragon cities where her presence would be unwelcome. She hunted small creatures for food, gathered frozen berries, and traded simple medicines with the few dragons who lived in the outer territories. They tolerated her existence the way one might tolerate a stray animal that caused no trouble. Tonight the blizzard was the worst she had ever witnessed. The walls of her cabin shook with each gust, and ice formed on the inside of her windows despite the fire burning in her small stove. Claire knew she should stay inside, knew that venturing out meant certain death for any creature foolish enough to challenge such weather. But then she heard something beneath the howling wind. It was a sound that vibrated through the ground itself. A deep rumbling cry that spoke of pain and desperation. Claire pressed her ear against the frozen floor and felt it again, stronger this time, coming from somewhere beyond the eastern ridge. Her heart began to race as she recognized what it might be. Dragons did not cry out in pain. Everyone knew this truth. They were proud creatures who would rather die in silence than admit weakness to the world around them. For a dragon to make such a sound meant something had gone terribly wrong. Claire stood and stared at her door for a long moment. Every rational thought in her mind screamed at her to stay inside, to ignore whatever was happening out there, to survive the night and investigate in the morning. But she had been a medic once, had sworn an oath to help those in need regardless of the danger to herself. That oath did not specify what species deserved her care. She grabbed her emergency lantern, pulled on every piece of warm clothing she owned, and pushed open the door against the screaming wind. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and freezing the moisture on her skin within seconds. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her face as the snow swirled in chaotic patterns. But she pushed forward anyway, following the sound that continued to pulse through the ground beneath her feet. The journey to the eastern ridge should have taken 10 minutes on a normal day. Tonight it took nearly an hour of struggling through waist-deep snow and fighting winds that threatened to throw her off the mountainside. Twice she fell and had to dig herself out of snowdrifts that tried to bury her alive. Her fingers grew numb inside her gloves, and her face burned with the cold that penetrated every layer of protection. But she kept moving forward because the sound grew louder with each step. When she finally crested the ridge and looked down into the ravine below, Claire stopped breathing for a moment. Her lantern light fell upon something that defied everything she thought she knew about this world. 2 dragons lay collapsed in the snow, their massive bodies twisted at painful angles where they had fallen from the sky. But these were not ordinary dragons. Their scales shimmered with colors she had never seen before, silver and white and pale blue that seemed to glow with an inner light even in the darkness of the storm. Their horns bore bands of platinum metal, the sacred markers of the imperial bloodline that Claire had only heard about in whispered stories. These were elder dragons, ancient beings of immense power who served directly under the emperor himself. And they were dying right in front of her. Claire half slid and half fell down the ravine wall, her body moving before her mind could catch up with what she was doing. She landed in the snow beside the larger dragon, a male whose scales had turned gray with frost crystals that covered his entire body. His eyes were closed, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that produced small clouds of steam in the frozen air. The smaller dragon was female, her scales carrying a faint blue luminescence that flickered like a candle about to go out. Her wings were torn and bent at wrong angles, and ice had formed in the wounds where her blood had frozen before it could flow. She whimpered softly. A sound like distant music played on broken instruments. Claire knelt between them and assessed the situation with the clinical eye of someone who had treated hundreds of wounded soldiers. They were suffering from severe frostbite and hypothermia, conditions that would kill any creature if not treated quickly. Their legendary fire, the inner heat that all dragons possessed, had gone cold somehow. Without it, they were as vulnerable to the winter as any ordinary being. She knew the law of this world very well. Touching a dragon without permission was punishable by death. Touching an imperial dragon meant a death so terrible that stories of it were used to frighten children. If she helped these creatures, and they survived, they might reward her kindness with execution, but Claire Weston had never been very good at following rules that asked her to let people die. She pulled off her outer coat and laid it across the female dragon's neck where the pulse point would be. Then she began to dig through the snow, searching for anything she could burn to create heat. She found dead branches buried beneath the drifts, frozen solid but still useful. She gathered them into a pile and used her emergency fire starter to create a small flame that slowly grew into something larger. The male dragon's eyes opened slightly as the warmth began to reach him. They were golden, like molten metal poured into orbs of impossible beauty. He watched her work without speaking, without moving, his gaze following her every action as she built more fires around them. Claire talked to them as she worked, the same way she had once talked to wounded soldiers on the battlefield. She told them they were going to be fine, that she would not let them die tonight, that they just needed to hold on a little longer. She did not know if they could understand her words, but she knew that a calm voice could sometimes mean the difference between a patient fighting to live and a patient giving up. The storm continued to rage around them, but Claire Weston had made her choice. She would save these dragons or die trying, and no law in the universe was going to stop her from doing what she knew was right. The hours crawled by like wounded creatures, dragging themselves through the snow, and Claire worked without rest as the blizzard continued its assault on the mountainside. Her fires burned in a protective ring around the two fallen dragons, but the heat was not enough to reverse the damage that the cold had already done to their bodies. She needed more supplies, more fuel, more of everything she did not have. Claire made the dangerous journey back to her cabin 3 times that night, each trip a battle against wind and snow that seemed determined to kill her. She stripped her home of everything useful, carrying blankets and heating cells and dried wood through the frozen darkness. By her 3rd trip, she was operating on nothing but willpower and the stubborn refusal to accept failure. The female dragon's condition worried her most. The ice crystals had penetrated deep into her wing membranes, and the tissue was beginning to die from lack of blood flow. Claire had seen this kind of damage before in soldiers who had been trapped in frozen environments, and she knew that, without intervention, the dragon would lose her wings entirely. She heated water in a small pot over one of her fires and soaked strips of cloth until they were warm and wet. Then she began the delicate process of applying heated compresses to the frozen tissue, working slowly to restore circulation without causing further damage. It was tedious work that required patience and steady hands, and Claire possessed both in abundance. The male dragon continued to watch her with those golden eyes that seemed to see right through her. His breathing had grown stronger over the past hour, and some color had returned to his scales. But he still did not speak or move, as if he was waiting to see what she would do next. Claire talked to him anyway, filling the silence with words that kept her focused on the task at hand. I was a medic on a colonial ship, she told him as she worked on the female's wings. And we were supposed to establish a new settlement on a planet 3 star systems away from here. Something went wrong during the jump, and we ended up crashing on your world instead. I do not know if it was a navigation error or equipment failure, but I was the only one who survived. The male dragon blinked slowly, and Claire took this as a sign that he was listening. Your people found me wandering through the snow about a week after the crash. I thought they were going to kill me, but instead they brought me to a settlement and told me I could live as long as I stayed out of the way. I have been out here ever since, just trying to survive and hoping that someday another ship from Earth might pass through this system. She paused to check the female's pulse, which was weak but steady. I know I am breaking your laws by helping you. I know what the punishment is for touching an imperial dragon, but I cannot just leave you out here to die. That is not who I am, and that is not what humans do. The male dragon's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise or curiosity, but he still did not respond around midnight. The female dragon's temperature began to drop again, despite everything Claire had done. The heating cells were running out of power, and the fires were consuming fuel faster than she could gather it. She was running out of options and running out of time. Claire made a decision that went against every rule of survival she had ever learned. She removed her outer layers of clothing and pressed her body against the female dragon's neck, wrapping her arms around the massive creature and sharing the warmth of her own blood. It was a desperate act that offered only a small amount of heat, but it was all she had left to give the cold bit into her exposed skin like thousands of tiny knives. She could feel her own body temperature beginning to drop as the heat flowed out of her and into the dragon. But she held on anyway, whispering words of encouragement that grew softer as her strength faded. "Stay with me," she said, through chattering teeth. "You are going to make it through this, I promise you. Just hold on a little longer. Just keep fighting." The male dragon moved for the first time since Claire had found them. He shifted his massive body closer and extended one wing over Claire and the female, creating a shelter that blocked the wind and trapped what little warmth remained. His scales were still cold, but the gesture spoke louder than any words could have. They stayed like that for hours. 3 unlikely beings huddled together against a storm that wanted to kill them all. Claire drifted in and out of consciousness as her body struggled to maintain its core temperature. She dreamed of Earth, of green forests and blue oceans and skies that did not try to freeze you to death. She dreamed of her mother's kitchen and the smell of bread baking in the oven when she opened her eyes again. The first gray light of dawn was creeping over the mountain peaks, and the storm had finally begun to fade. Claire tried to move, but found that her muscles would not respond properly. She was shivering violently, and her hands had turned an alarming shade of blue. She had given too much of herself to save these creatures, and now she was paying the price. The female dragon stirred beneath her touch, her eyes opening to reveal irises of deep violet that swirled with inner light. She looked at Claire with an expression of confusion and wonder, as if she could not understand why a human was pressed against her body in such an intimate way. "You are awake," Claire managed to say through lips that barely moved. "That is good. Your temperature is stable now, and I think the worst is over." The female dragon made a soft sound that vibrated through Claire's chest. And then something incredible happened. A voice appeared inside Claire's mind, gentle and musical, and filled with emotions that words alone could never capture. It was the dragon speaking directly into her thoughts, forming a telepathic bond that Claire had never known was possible. "Little human," the voice said, with a warmth that seemed to push back the cold, "what have you done for us tonight?" Claire smiled weakly as consciousness began to slip away from her again. "I did what I was trained to do," she whispered. "I helped, and then the darkness took her." And she knew nothing more until the sound of wings filled the air above them. Claire woke to warmth, real warmth that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket made of sunlight. She opened her eyes slowly and found herself lying between the two dragons, their bodies positioned to create a shelter of scales and wings that protected her from the lingering cold of the mountain morning. The male dragon was awake and watching her, his golden eyes filled with an intelligence that went far beyond anything Claire had expected. When he saw that she was conscious, he lowered his massive head until it was level with hers, and she felt his breath wash over her face like a warm summer breeze. "You nearly died saving us," his voice said inside her mind, deep and resonant like distant thunder rolling across an open plain. "No creature has ever shown such courage on behalf of my kind." Claire tried to sit up, but found that her body was still weak from the night's ordeal. The male dragon shifted slightly to support her, his scales surprisingly gentle against her back. "I could not let you die," she said aloud, her voice hoarse from the cold and exhaustion. "It would have been wrong to walk away when I had the ability to help." The male dragon made a sound that might have been laughter, though it vibrated through the ground with enough force to shake loose snow from the nearby rocks. "I am called Varentos," he told her, "High Sentinel of the Emperor's personal guard and sworn protector of the Imperial bloodline. And you, little human, have done something that no being has accomplished in 10,000 years of recorded history." Claire blinked in confusion, not understanding what he meant. "I touched a dragon," she said simply. "I know that is forbidden. You did far more than that," Varentos replied, and there was wonder in his mental voice now. "You formed a bond with us. When you pressed your body against Seraphine and shared your warmth, you opened a connection between your mind and ours. It is something that has only ever happened between dragons of the highest bloodlines. And now it has happened with a human." The female dragon stirred beside Claire, her violet eyes opening with a clarity that had not been there before. She lifted her elegant head and looked at Claire with an expression that combined gratitude with something deeper, something almost like affection. "I am Seraphine," she said in a voice like wind chimes caught in a gentle breeze, "daughter of Emperor Valderin and heir to the throne of the Draconian Empire. And I owe you my life." Claire's heart stopped for a moment as the weight of those words settled over her. She had not just saved two random dragons from the storm. She had saved the princess of an entire empire, a being of such importance that even speaking her name without permission was considered a crime. "I did not know who you were," Claire whispered. "I just saw two creatures who needed help, and that is precisely why your actions mean so much," Seraphine replied, moving closer until her snout was just inches from Claire's face. "You did not help us because of what we could give you or because you feared what we might do. You helped us simply because it was the right thing to do. Do you understand how rare that is in our world?" Varentos nodded his massive head in agreement. "We were attacked last night by assassins who sought to end the Imperial line," he explained. "They ambushed us during a routine patrol and used weapons that drained our inner fire, leaving us vulnerable to the cold. We crashed in that ravine and could not move, could not call for help, could not save ourselves. We would have died before morning if you had not found us." Claire listened in silence as the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. She had stumbled into the middle of a political assassination attempt and had somehow saved the future ruler of the Dragon Empire. "The assassins?" she asked hesitantly. "Who were they working for?" "That is something we must discover," Varentos said grimly. "But first we must return to the capital and inform the Emperor that his daughter is alive. He will have felt her distress through their bond and will be searching for her even now." As if summoned by his words, a distant sound reached Claire's ears through the crisp morning air. It was the beating of wings, many wings, approaching rapidly from the direction of the rising sun. Seraphine had lifted her head and listened, her expression shifting from relief to concern. "The guard is coming," she said. "My father's elite warriors. They will have followed the bond to find me. That is good news, is it not? Claire asked, but something in Seraphine's voice made her uncertain for toes, and Seraphine exchanged a look that spoke of worry and fear. And Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The law is absolute, Verento said slowly, and you have broken it in ways that cannot be ignored. You touched imperial dragons, formed a bond with the heir to the throne, and witnessed secrets that no human should ever know. The penalty for these crimes is death, Seraphine added, and her voice carried a sadness that seemed genuine. And I do not know if I have the authority to protect you from what is coming. Claire looked toward the horizon, where dark shapes were now visible against the pale blue sky, growing larger with each passing moment. There were dozens of them, maybe more, and each one was a dragon warrior trained to kill without hesitation or mercy. She had known the risks when she chose to help these creatures. She had known that her kindness might cost her everything. But she did not regret her choice, not for a single moment. Then I will face what comes, she said quietly. I did what I believed was right, and I will accept the consequences. That is also what humans do. Seraphine stared at her with those violet eyes, and something shifted in her expression. Something that looked like determination. No, the princess said firmly. I will not allow them to harm you. You saved my life, and I will protect yours. This I swear on my blood and my honor. The first of the dragon warriors crested the ridge above them, their scales gleaming like polished armor in the morning light. And Claire Weston prepared to face an army with nothing but the hope that kindness might somehow triumph over law. The dragon warriors descended upon the ravine like a storm of scales and fury, their wings beating the air with enough force to send snow swirling in violent clouds around Claire and her unlikely companions. There were 40 of them, at least, each one massive and armored and carrying weapons that gleamed with deadly purpose. They landed in a perfect circle around the ravine, cutting off any possibility of escape, their eyes fixed on Claire with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. These were the elite soldiers of the Draconian Empire, beings who had lived for thousands of years and had killed more enemies than Claire could possibly imagine. One dragon pushed forward from the ring, his scales black as obsidian and marked with scars that told stories of countless battles survived. His eyes were red like burning coals, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. I am Commander Tyrithus of the Imperial Guard, he announced, his words echoing off the mountain walls. And I demand to know what has happened here. Verento stepped forward to meet him, his golden scales still pale from the ordeal of the previous night, but his posture radiating strength and command. We were attacked by assassins during our patrol, Verentos reported. They used weapons that drained our fire and left us to die in the storm. This human found us and saved our lives through the night. Tyrithus turned his burning gaze toward Claire, and she felt the heat of his attention like standing too close to an open flame. His lip curled back to reveal teeth longer than her forearm, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. A human touched the imperial princess? He asked, his voice dripping with disgust. A lesser being put its hands on the heir to the throne? She saved my life, Seraphine said firmly, moving to stand beside Claire in a gesture of protection that made several of the warriors shift uncomfortably. Without her intervention, both Verentos and I would have died before dawn. The law does not care about intentions, Tyrithus replied coldly. The law is clear and has been clear for 10,000 years. No lesser being may touch a dragon of the imperial bloodline. The punishment is death, and there are no exceptions. He gestured to 2 of his warriors, who began to move toward Claire with deliberate steps. Seize the human, Tyrithus commanded. She will be taken to the capital for public execution. Claire did not run or try to hide. She stood her ground with her head held high and her hands steady at her sides. She had known this moment might come, had known from the first moment she touched those frozen scales that she might be signing her own death warrant, but before the warriors could reach her, Varenthos moved with a speed that seemed impossible for a creature of his size. He placed himself directly between Claire and the approaching soldiers. His wings spread wide in a display of dominance. "This human is under my personal protection," he declared, his mental voice broadcasting to every dragon present. "She risked her life to save us when she could have stayed safe in her cabin and let us die. She showed courage and compassion that I have rarely seen in any being, human or dragon. I will not allow her to be punished for her kindness." The warriors stopped, uncertain how to proceed when a high sentinel was blocking their path. "You do not have the authority to override imperial law," Tyrithus snarled. "Not even you, Varenthos." "Perhaps not," Seraphine said, stepping forward to stand beside her protector. "But I do." A murmur rippled through the assembled warriors. The princess had never asserted her authority in such a direct manner before, and many of them did not know how to respond. "You are not yet empress," Tyrithus said carefully, his tone shifting to something more cautious. "And even if you were, the old laws cannot be changed on a whim." "I am not changing the law," Seraphine replied, her violet eyes blazing with determination. "I am invoking my right as a member of the imperial bloodline to grant personal protection to any being who has saved my life. This right is written in the same ancient texts that establish the laws you are so eager to enforce." Tyrithus opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, a shadow fell over the entire ravine. A shadow so vast and dark that it seemed to swallow the morning light itself. Every dragon present looked up, and Claire watched as expressions of anger and hostility transformed into something very different. Fear, respect, and reverent awe crossed their faces as something enormous descended from above. The dragon that landed before them was unlike anything Claire had ever seen. His scales were black as the void between stars, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. His eyes were silver and ancient, carrying the weight of millennia within their depths. His presence was so overwhelming that Claire found it difficult to breathe, as if the very air had grown heavy in his presence. This was Emperor Valderin, ruler of the Draconian Empire and the most powerful being on this world. Every dragon, except Seraphine, immediately lowered themselves to the ground in a gesture of absolute submission. Even Tyrithos, the fierce commander who had seemed so confident moments ago, pressed his scarred head against the frozen earth. The Emperor ignored them all and moved directly toward his daughter, his massive form surprisingly graceful as he approached. When he reached Seraphine, he lowered his head and touched his snout gently against hers in a gesture of profound relief. "My child." His voice resonated through Claire's mind like the tolling of a great bell. "I felt your pain through our bond and feared the worst. To find you alive is a gift beyond measure. I am alive because of her," Seraphine said, turning to indicate Claire. "This human saved both Varenthos and me when we had no hope of survival." The Emperor turned his silver gaze upon Claire, and she felt as if her entire being was being examined, weighed, and measured by a consciousness far greater than her own. She wanted to look away, wanted to hide from that penetrating stare, but she forced herself to stand tall and meet his eyes for a long moment. Neither of them moved then. Emperor Valderin asked her a question that echoed not just in her mind, but seemed to resonate through the very fabric of reality itself. "Human," he said, and his voice carried no judgment, only genuine curiosity. "Why did you help them when you knew the law would demand your death in return?" Claire took a deep breath and answered with the only truth she had. "Because they were dying," she said simply, "and I could help. Where I come from, that is enough reason. That is what humans do." The Emperor stared at her for another eternal moment, and Claire waited to learn whether her life would end on this frozen mountainside or continue for another day. The silence that followed Claire's words stretched across the frozen ravine like a held breath, and every dragon present watched their emperor with expressions of uncertainty and anticipation. The fate of one small human hung in the balance, but something larger was happening here. Something that could change the course of history itself. Emperor Valderin studied Claire with those ancient silver eyes, and she could feel his mind touching the edges of hers. Not invading but gently exploring the truth of who she was and what she had done. She did not resist, did not try to hide anything, because she had nothing to be ashamed of after what felt like an eternity. The Emperor did something that made his entire guard recoil in shock and disbelief. Bowed his head to Claire Weston. It was not a deep bow, not the kind of submission that dragons showed to their ruler, but it was unmistakable. The most powerful being on this world had inclined his head in respect to a creature that his people considered lower than insects. "Stand," Emperor Valderin commanded. And Claire realized with a start that she had fallen to her knees without noticing. She rose on trembling legs and faced him once more. "In all my centuries of life," the Emperor said, and his voice carried to every dragon present, "I have witnessed countless acts of courage and sacrifice. I have seen warriors give their lives for their kin, and leaders fall protecting their people. But I have never seen someone risk everything for strangers who could offer nothing in return." He turned to look at his warriors, his gaze sweeping across them with an expression that combined disappointment and something like shame. "We have grown arrogant," he continued. "We have spent so long believing in our own superiority that we have forgotten what true strength looks like. We measure power in fire and claw and the ability to destroy. But this human has shown us that the greatest power is the courage to help those who cannot help themselves." Tyrathos shifted uncomfortably, his red eyes fixed on the ground. "My lord," he said carefully, "the law has stood for 10,000 years. If we ignore it now, what message does that send to our people?" "It sends the message that wisdom can grow and change," Emperor Valderin replied firmly. "It sends the message that we are capable of recognizing when all laws have become chains that bind us to foolishness, rather than shields that protect us from harm." He turned back to Claire and spoke in a voice that rang with authority and finality. "Claire Weston of Earth," he declared, "you are hereby granted full citizenship within the Draconian Empire, with all the rights and protections that this status provides. You will be treated as an equal to any dragon of noble birth, and anyone who harms you will answer to me personally." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the assembled warriors. No human had ever been granted such an honor in the entire history of the Empire. Furthermore, the Emperor continued, "I hereby order a full review of all laws pertaining to humans and other species within our borders. We have judged entire peoples based on fear and prejudice rather than truth, and this must change. My daughter lives because a human chose compassion over self-preservation, and we owe it to her sacrifice to become worthy of such kindness." Seraphine moved to stand beside Claire, her violet eyes shining with emotion. "Thank you, Father," she said softly. "Thank you for seeing what I see." The Emperor nodded and then addressed Claire directly once more. "You asked for nothing in return for saving my daughter's life," he said. "And that is precisely why you deserve everything I can give you. Is there anything you wish to request?" Claire thought for a moment, her mind spinning with the sudden reversal of her fortunes. Just minutes ago, she had been facing execution, and now she was being offered the favor of an emperor. "There are other humans on this world," she said finally, "scattered throughout the outer territories, living in fear and poverty because they have no place in your society. I ask that they be given the same opportunity I have been given, the chance to prove their worth and be judged as individuals rather than as members of a lesser species." Emperor Valderin studied her with renewed respect. You could have asked for wealth or power or anything your heart desired, he said. And instead you asked for justice for others. You continue to surprise me, Claire Weston. He turned to Tyrithus and issued his commands. Send messengers to every territory in the Empire. All humans are to be offered citizenship if they wish it, and any dragon who mistreats them will face imperial justice. The old ways are ending today, and a new age is beginning. The warriors scattered to carry out his orders. And within moments, only the Emperor, his daughter Varentos, and Claire remained in the ravine. Seraphine approached Claire and gently touched her snout to Claire's forehead, a gesture of deep affection and gratitude. I will never forget what you did for me, the princess said, and I hope we can continue to know each other in the years to come. I would like that, Claire replied, and she found that she meant it. Against all odds, she'd found friends in the most unlikely of places. Varentos stepped forward and bowed his golden head. I underestimated your species, he admitted. I believed that humans were incapable of true nobility. You have shown me how wrong I was, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to repay my debt to you. There is no debt, Claire said firmly. I did what anyone should do when they see someone in need. If my actions help change a few minds along the way, then that is more reward than I ever expected. Emperor Valderin watched this exchange with something that might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell on a face made of scales and ancient power. Come, he said finally, let us return to the capital. There is much work to be done, and I believe Claire Weston has earned a place at our table while we do it. As they prepared to leave the ravine, Claire looked back at her small cabin in the distance, the tiny structure that had been her home for 3 lonely years. She had come to this world as a castaway, a survivor with no hope of rescue or belonging, but today she was leaving as something else entirely. She was leaving as a citizen, a friend, and a symbol of everything humanity could be when given the chance to shine. The dragons took flight, and Claire rode on Seraphine's back as they soared toward a future that neither of their peoples could have imagined just 1 day ago. Below them, the frozen mountains gave way to green valleys and distant cities that sparkled in the morning light. Claire did not know what challenges lay ahead, or how difficult the road to true equality would be. She knew that change took time, and that old prejudices did not die easily. But she also knew that every great journey began with a single step, or in this case, with a single act of kindness. On a frozen mountain during the worst storm in a century, she had saved 2 dragons, because it was the right thing to do, and in doing so, she had changed the world. The sun rose higher in the sky as they flew eastward, and Claire Weston smiled as she watched a new dawn break over an empire that would never be the same again.